Hey, what's up? This is Alex from Level Up Guitar. Today we're going to be going over the 5 mistakes people make when learning their pentatonics on guitar. For better or worse, the guitar is a pattern-driven instrument, and many people can look up a pentatonic scale and start to improvise, but then get caught into what's called a pentatonic rut. We're going to explain what that pentatonic rut is today and how to overcome it. The first mistake that people make when learning their pentatonic scales is not knowing the major to minor relationship. Okay, oftentimes I'll be in a guitar lesson and, many times the student will actually know a pentatonic scale or two, but almost always this is in the context of a minor pentatonic. I'll be like, okay, great, let's jam in the key of A minor, and the student will jam in A minor pentatonic scale, and then I say, hey, wait, let's go ahead and switch gears and let's jam in A major. More often than not, the student will say, oh, I actually don't know my major pentatonic, or they'll be playing a different position, okay? But it's very important to understand at first that within every minor pentatonic scale is a major pentatonic scale. And the more we talk about music theory, this is the major to minor, relative major to minor relationship that we actually discuss quite a bit when we're talking about modes and tonal music. So within every minor pentatonic scale, we have a major pentatonic scale, okay? And the quick shortcut that I use to teach people this is if I take a pentatonic shape and I put my index finger on the root, then the relative major pentatonic to this shape is with the ring finger or pinky finger, okay? So the quick shortcut that I use is minor equals index, major equals pinky. And as I was teaching this a couple years ago, one of my students had a clever saying. He said, well, okay, how am I supposed to remember this? He said, oh, if I'm a major snob, I put my pinky up when I drink wine, or whatever. So I thought that was a fun little mnemonic antidote that he gave that. So quick reference, minor equals index, major equals pinky. Okay, the second biggest mistake that people make when learning pentatonics is combining all of the shapes at once. And I understand where this comes from because, what I call the root on 6 minor pentatonic, many people call that shape number 1. This lays out really, really well on guitar. And you could actually make an argument that this shape is why the guitar is tuned the way it is, or some people make the argument that it's because of the open E minor. But you can make a case for that. This pentatonic shape is why the guitar has its unique tuning, okay? And because of this, somebody just starting off with improvisation, what they'll do is they'll learn this shape, start kicking ass at it, and then say, oh, I want more. Then they'll go online and they will look up a scale diagram with all 5 positions put together, okay? And this is like almost always information overload. And oftentimes the student gets really discouraged because they were sounding really good with position 1, and then what they did is they prematurely learned all the rest of the positions. They weren't ready for it. And this is a terrible way to memorize the shapes for several reasons. Number 1, there's just way too many notes, way too many dots all over the fretboard to begin to memorize it. Number 2, when students do something like this, is they can almost always only apply this knowledge to 1 or 2 keys because they eventually get lost because of the information overload. And then number 3, they don't know where all the roots are because they're having such a hard time memorizing all the different shapes. And then number 4, they have a lot of difficulty applying this to the relative major and minor pentatonic, like we were talking about with, fault number 1 that people have. So what I do is, and I do this in my course Level Up Guitar, is I teach every single shape like I teach what I call the root on 6, okay? And I have everybody kick ass on every single position before they start to connect everything. okay? And what that means is, like I said, with this root on 6 pentatonic, you know, we use our index finger for the minor pentatonic and our pinky for the major. I applied that to every single shape. So I have a root on 5 shape where we use the index for the minor, the pinky on the major. The root on 4 shape, same thing, root on 3, root on 2, and there's no root on 1 because that's the same as the root on 6. So before we even connect everything, what we want to do is we want to start to make music in all of these different positions. And then once you start to make music, what you can do is then you can start to connect it, okay? It takes a little bit, you know, longer to develop this, but ultimately the student is a lot more successful in doing it this way. And what I do with all of these different shapes is every single pentatonic shape has its own vocabulary, okay? And what I do is I show the student popular bending notes within each position, okay? And the popular bending notes are both the same for the major and the minor, and that sort of develops a vocabulary. And these bending notes, you know, we go over it in my course. Basically, for the minor, bends up to the 5th and bends up to the root. And then if you were to transfer that to major, you'd be bending up to the 3rd and the major 6th. So that kind of gets the student sounding good in the position. So do not combine all the shapes prematurely. It is going to set you up for failure. Okay, the third mistake that people make when learning their pentatonics and learning to apply their pentatonics is not having a repertoire of other people's solos to draw from. And like I was saying, there's a certain vocabulary with every single shape, and what you want to do is as soon as you start to play one shape, you know, you run out of ideas, run up to the next, etc. So you'll notice a lot on my channel, what I do is I slow guitar solos down. And when I'm slowing a guitar solo down, not only is it important to know how to play the notes and know how to play the different positions, but also recognize what scale these positions or these licks are coming from, right? And so, like, you know, when I think of like root on 6, B minor pentatonic, I have a whole bunch of Hotel California guitar licks coming out of there. And the goal is to not necessarily plagiarize from Hotel California, but use that as a sort of jumping off point to get your own licks going. And so it's very important to learn other people's solos when you are learning scales. So you can say, oh, I see how this shape works within that solo. I like this lick, I'm going to draw from it. And then as you progress, you can talk about, well, how does these notes work over these chords? But ultimately, you do need to have a repertoire of solos you like. That's why whenever I start, you know, guitar solo or guitar lessons with people, I always get a good idea for, you know, what sort of guitarist they like. Because ultimately, you want to take all of this music theory knowledge and apply it to the music you like, so you can understand it, be inspired from it, learn to draw from it, learn to write, learn to improvise, etc. So it's very important to learn other people's guitar solos, especially guitar solos you like. Another mistake that people make when learning their pentatonics is not understanding the intervals of the scale. Okay, and this comes back to the fact that the guitar, for better or worse, is a pattern-driven instrument. Okay, like if I was a saxophone player or a trumpet player and I was building a scale, I would have to literally think root, minor third above that, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, flat 7. That's how they build the minor pentatonic scale. However, for the guitar player, you know, they have it easy in the sense that they learn that one position. Oh, here's this, you know, scale in A minor pentatonic. Oh, move it up a fret. Here's B flat pentatonic. So that is very easy for the guitar player to jump in and improvise. However, that kind of sets up a certain crutch, which a lot of people refer to as the pentatonic rut, because they can get started improvising with this shape, but then they ultimately get kind of stuck because they're going up and down the scale and they don't really have solo repertoire to draw from. They don't really know where the roots are or the bending notes. They're just kind of, you know, going up and down, and they don't feel like they're truly improvising. So it's also important to understand not only here's the root of my scale, but oh, here's the flat 3. How does that work with the chord? Oh, the flat 3 and the flat 7 in a bluesy context. You can put a quarter tone bend on that. You need to understand where all these notes are. Oh, here's the fifth. I can, that's part of such and such chord, etc. So what you want to be able to do is understand all of the intervals in your pentatonic shape, okay? And I know that's kind of a daunting task, but it ultimately starts with knowing where all the major and the minor roots are. And then from there, you can say, oh, if this is my minor pentatonic roots, then the next note up is the flat 3. Okay, cool, I can add a quarter tone bend on this and sound great. The next note back is the flat 7. I can add a quarter tone bend on this and sound great. Again, this is all stuff that we go over in my course here, but it's super important to know all of the intervals of every scale you learn, and it is, I guess it just sounds very intimidating when I say it like that, but it starts off with just knowing the roots, and then the pieces will fall into place after that. So learn your intervals, build scales like essentially every other instrument does outside of guitar. The last mistake that people make when learning their pentatonics, and again, this contributes with the pentatonic rut that I was talking about. And essentially, this pentatonic rut is I guess the fallacy of how easy it is to get started improvising with guitar, because you can look up that shape 1 minor pentatonic scale, and almost anybody can start to play some notes and sound pretty good. And the good thing about that is that it gains confidence. And the good thing about that too is, like I've said several times before, each shape has its own voice and has its own repertoire, and those like licks and that vocabulary is really what makes the guitar, in my opinion. But then I said the bad thing about that is that it makes it so easy to get started that people often get disenfranchised or discouraged when they progress, right? So the last thing that people, make a mistake with is not learning the other diatonic notes or modes of the pentatonic scales or major or minor pentatonic scales. And again, this is something that we do in my course, is we learn the 3 minor modes, 3 major modes, and connect them, and then talk about how they connect to the pentatonics. Basically, if you were to take all of the modes, all of the minor modes, stack them on top of each other, the common notes are the pentatonics. Same things with the majors. So if I was improvising over A Dorian, I can use A minor pentatonic. If it was A Phrygian, I can use A minor pentatonic. We can see how that can become a crutch. And these pentatonic shapes, penta meaning 5, are 5-tone scales, right? Once we start to add the other diatonic scales and modes, we have now 7 tones there, and it gets a little bit harder to memorize, and again, people get discouraged because it's so easy to start to improvise. Like, what are these? It's so easy to start to improvise with these pentatonic shapes. They're like, what am I doing here, adding these extra notes? This is hard, blah, 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 blah. So you want to learn all your modes and diatonic scales in addition to the pentatonics. Okay, well, thank you so much for watching here. Hopefully you'll consider subscribing to my channel or checking out my website, lvlupgtr.com. In this video, I wanted to give you a list of kind of cautionary, real-world things that I've run into while teaching pentatonics and common pitfalls that people have to overcome when learning these. Again, to summarize, that first pentatonic shape is very deceiving because it is easy to learn but hard to master. You want to know your roots, you want to have a repertoire of other people's solos, you want to know your intervals, you want to know your major and minor relationships. There's so much more to that single shape than just kind of running up and down the scale. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great day.